Readings in Philippine History: The Socio-Economic and Political Issues in the Philippines. Learning Objectives. First is to define the role of the Church in the Philippines in the 18th century context. Second is to discuss the Filipino culture as a result of the Spanish supremacy in the Philippines. And lastly, evaluate the country's progress by formulating an insight. Lesson Outline. Under the lesson outline is the political aspect, religious aspect, and the economic aspect.
Marcelo del Pilar stood at the forefront of the Filipino activism of the period, both in Malolos and in Manila. He relentlessly fought the abuses of the friars. He was said to be the principal author of a manifesto signed by about 800 individuals entitled Viva España, Viva el Rey, Viva el Ejército, Fuera los Frailes, or in English, Long Live Spain, Long live the king, long live the army, throw the friars out. The La Soberania Monarchical and Filipinas, or in English, Friar Supremacy in the Philippines, was one of the first pamphlets Marcelo del Pilar wrote in Spain. He was the father of the Philippine journalism. Del Pilar founded the Diaryong Tagalog, exposed the atrocities committed by the Spanish friars against the Filipinos of the time. The article by Del Pilar sparked the defiance of ordinary Filipinos against the friars. So the La Soberania Monarchical and Filipinas was criticized the friars for their incorrect doctrine, which has caused the Filipino people to live in poverty and suffering.
So let's talk about political aspects. So political aspect, the interference of the friars in the government of the Philippines is so ingrained that without difficulty, the friars control the status quo of the country in the defiance of the nation and the institutions. Command of the regular prelates under whose guidance the parish priests think, preach, confess, and act with marvelous uniformity. So let's first talk about how the friars got into their positions. First is the Patronato Real. So Patronato Real is the royal patronage giving the power of Spain to appoint religious priest or administrator. Next is service to God and the king. And next is clerical ascendancy. They're the one promoting the friars. So next is they offer the government to suppress the country's rebelliousness, and the government gives them its all autocratic support. Going to extreme if the friars so demand, will they portray the ruler as the personification of tyranny and despotism. They offer the people to soften the tyranny, and the people place its wealth in their hands so that they may defend them against official rapacity. The basis of monastic wealth is the lack of union between the people and the government. It is necessary to foster it by finding the resentment of the first and the despotism in the second. So, in this part, the the king only listened to the friars, and they only listened to the friars' support, and also municipal official local government is below than the friars, since friars is mostly the one leading as a whole back in the days, so local government doesn't have any power or to help us. Next is the Philippines, however, religious amortization is very conspicuous ignorance and fanatism, encouraged by the monastic institution and ignoring the claims of blood relation as if they were contrary to divine law have been responsible for centuries. For the immense number of disinherited families, the best lands, the best estates, those passed to the control of monastic communities. Today, the convents are the millionaires of the country. Their large fund cannot be alienated. Their lands are cultivated without the stimulus of the owners and with discouragement on the part of the tilers. Their lease and the rent increases from time to time and portion in proportion to the improvements introduced on the land. Next is the monastic properties are subject to land titles of 10% and the increase in their income owed to favor the government treasury. In the year 1887, the provincial government of Laguna tried to get information about the increase in the income of the lands and Calamba belonging to the Dominican friars. It found out that the annual income of 5,000 pesos had been sextupled to amounting to more than 30,000 pesos. And next is the Filipinos pay direct taxes consisting of the personal cedula, urban tax, industrial subsidy, and additional municipal tax, provincial tax, and personal loan. And beside this, the indirect one of the market's vehicles, horses, tombs, and surcharges, slaughter of cattle, river tolls, and others. This is what we call the tax of religious festivals. The papal decree of 2nd of May 1867 aimed to relieve the Filipino Catholics of this burden by reducing the number of feast days and ordering that each diocese that only one patron saint to be named by the Holy See, and in fact this was done. So this was an act, um, an act, but the thing is it doesn't work for us because we don't have Holy See or Santo Papa before. So this cause the friars were the one leading us. So we still have to pay the taxes in religious festivals and all and all. So other than that, we're also paying for the rosaries and the church, and also in the 50 if in the district there are 50 families. They're required to make or build a church that will cost 1,000, 5,000, or 10,000. And the Reverend Fathers are empowered to name the person who ought to be deported, and the government solemnly declares that the parish corrects opinions suffices so that the deportation may not be arbitrary. It is no longer fanatism that builds opulence, no, it is fear of the group which has been raised to the power, which with no one stroke of the pen or a low whisper can kill the happiness of one who obstructs or does not cooperate in the development of its schemes of exploitation. So, in conclusion, the friars really maltreated the Filipino back in the days. So that's why we were on a phylocracy, whereas um, it's not the government holding us, but the friars.
Religious aspect. The national integrity is in danger if the curate does not like a foundation of a building that is to be laid, and public health demands that the corpse should not be brought into the church, and this same litany goes in everything. The guarantee of national integrity is not the church, nor can it be in the friars. It is in the same popular aspiration of fusing and identifying the interest of the Philippines. Consolidating the fraternity between Spain and the Philippines is the best defense of national integrity, as it is Spain's ideal and it is the dream of the Philippines. The first statement emphasizes the belief that the preservation of a nation's integrity and sovereignty is not solely dependent on religious institutions like the church, but rather on the collective aspirations and the unity of the people. The second statement emphasizes the strong bond of the two nations, safeguarding the integrity of both nations, and harmful to the Philippines and detrimental to the interests of both Spain and the Philippines. Even if we assume that the divisive plan of the friars succeeds and the antagonism between the rules and the ruled intensifies, what means of pacification do the convents offer? And where will the danger to national integrity come from if the friars command public opinion? For the statement 1, the convents would not be able to rely on government forces for pacification, as the power of the monastic order would be sufficient in that case, and the friars would not be able to command public opinion to their advantage, which would reject their authority. There is a unanimous cry for the immediate expulsion of the friars. As for us, the Philippines, we don't believe it prudent to leave national integrity in the hands of the friars. It is good neither for the reigning monarch nor for any political interest that monasticism continues to be the arbiter of the fate of Spain in the Philippines Islands.
Economic aspect. The laws that regulate the foundation and development of convents in the Philippines are undoubtedly based on the belief that monastic life is unproductive. numerous other regulations pertaining to the manner of supplying this need for wire, off, and other things of the kind. So this discusses the laws governing the establishment and growth of convents in the Philippines. It suggests that these laws are influenced by the belief that monastic life is unproductive. The passage also mentions various regulations related to providing necessities such as wire, off, and other similar terms. But the abundance found in the converts makes laughable the pity of the government. The Philippine government lacks resources to undertake public works, and on the other hand, the monastic orders build grand and costly convents in Manila, and in each parish of 3,000 souls, they erect a spacious palace for the residence of the regular curate. The government establishes primary schools in each town. The government houses are made of light materials like those destined for the tribunal, which hardly approximate the stable of the friar curators. So this implies that while the government struggles to fund public works, the monastic orders are able to construct large and expensive convents in Manila. Additionally, it mentions that in each parish, with 3,000 residents, a lavish palace is built for the regular curate's residence. The passage also appears that to criticize the disparity in resource allocation between the government and the monastic orders. Moving forward, the government finds 1,000 obstacles in collecting taxes from tax-paying public, but the monastic orders empty without the difficulty the purse of the same public in return for heavenly promises. So the monastic orders are easily receiving financial contributions from the same public in exchange for promises of heavenly rewards. This implies that while the government struggles to gather funds, the monastic orders are able to obtain financial support more effortlessly. Moving forward, the amortization of lands is fatal to agriculture everywhere. Experience and economics have shown the need for loss of this entail. In other countries where such wise measures have been adopted, capital was immediately channeled to greater and better production. The sale of religious objects that rise in price by reason of priestly blessed constitutes a true and indisputable simony, and notwithstanding, one of the principal sources of income of the monastic order is the trade in religious objects. So, it has a negative consequences for agriculture in general. Both experience and economics have demonstrated the necessity for disentailment laws. In countries where such measures have been implemented, capital has been effectively directed towards increased and improved production. So, what is true of belts is also true of scapulars of the recollected fathers, of those rosaries of Dominican fathers, of the cords of the Franciscan friars, and of various others too many to enumerate. The price dynamics described for belts also apply to other religious items such as scapulars of the Recollect Fathers, rosaries of Dominican Fathers, cord of the Franciscan friars, and numerous items that are too much numerous to list. The pricing strategy of increasing of the values of object through the religious associations, blessings, and indulgences is not unique to belts but extends to various other religious items as well. This suggests a pattern of pricing practices within different religious orders, where the perceived spiritual value of the item leads to higher prices.
Lesson 1: Taxation during the Spanish period.
Taxation during the Spanish period. This is a brief discussion of the revenues enjoyed by the Spanish government for more than 3 centuries of their occupation of the Philippine Islands. Only the salient features of the central or insular revenue system that has historical significance were included in the discussion.
Taxes imposed by the Spanish government in the Philippines. Taxation during the Spanish period was compulsory. All Spanish colonies in America and the Philippines were required to pay taxes for two reasons. Number one is that for recognition of Spain's sovereignty over the colonies, and the second is that to defray the expenses of pacification, or also known as the act of forcibly suppressing hostility within the colonies and governance thereafter. So, several colonies' laws on taxation were made by the Real Supremo Consejo de las Indias, or Royal and Supreme Council of the Indies, for the Spanish monarch. These laws were embodied in the compilation of legislations related to the New World called the Recopilación de Leyes de los Reinos de las Indias. It was a 4-volume collection of laws relating to the Indies, which was published in Madrid in 1861. Taxes during the Spanish period in the Philippines were the tribute, sanctorum, donativo, caja de comunidad, and servicio personal. The tribute, also known as tributo, was a general tax paid by the Filipinos to Spain, which amounted to 8 reals. Those who were required to pay the tributo were the first one is the 18 to 50 years old males. The second one is the carpenters, bricklayers, blacksmiths, tailors, and shoemakers. And the third one is the town workers, such as those in road construction and those who in public in nature. The sanctorum was a tax in the amount of 3 reals. These were required for the cost of Christianization, including the construction of churches and the purchase of materials for religious celebrations. Donativo was a 2 in the amount of half real for the military campaign of the government against the Muslims. In later years, however, the amount collected from the donativo was almost exclusively used for the Spanish fort in Zamboanga. Caja de Comunidad. This tax was collected in the amount of 1 real for the incurred expenses of the town in the construction of roads, repairs of bridges, or the improvement of public buildings.
Servicio personal. This was the Poloy servicios, a form of forced labor during the Spanish period in the Philippines. All able-bodied males 16 to 60 years old were required to work in the construction of bridges, churches, and galleon ships. They were called polista. Earlier, the polistas were required to work for 40 days. However, the number of days was lowered to 15 days in 1884. Some of the polista were brought to fight against the Muslim, and others were brought in the Spanish expedition. The only way that a polista can be freed from forced labor was when he paid a fala or fine, but only very few could afford to pay the fine. The gobernador sila, cabeza de barangay, and other members of the principala were exempt from the forced labor and fala. In summary, servicio personal was a system of forced labor in the Philippines during Spanish colonial rule, where able-bodied men were compelled to work on public projects for a specific number of days. The system also forced some of them to serve as soldiers. To be released from this labor, they had to pay a fine, but only a few could afford it. Meanwhile, the local elite were exempt from this obligation, causing further inequality and discontent among the Filipino population.
Revolts against the tribute. Cagayan and Dingus revolts in 1859. The Cagayan and Dingus revolts against the tribute occurred in Luzon, in the present-day provinces of Cagayan and Ilocos Norte. The revolt of Ilocanos, Ibanags, and other Filipinos was triggered by the alleged abuses of tax collectors, including the collection of high taxes. 6 tax collectors who had arrived from Vigan were killed by the natives' Governor-General Santiago de Vera sent Spanish and Filipino colonial troops to pacify the rebels. The rebels were pardoned in the end. The Philippine tax system was also reformed because of the revolt. Agustin Sumuroy's revolt in 1649 to 1650. On June 1, 1649, led by Agustin Sumuroy, who was a waray from Palapa in today's northern Samar, together with his followers, rose in arms against the Spaniards over the polo y servicio, or forced labor system being started in Samar. The rebels were responsible for the death murder of the parish priest of Palapag. The revolt spread to Cebu, Masbate, Camiguin, Bicol, Camarines, Albay, Zamboanga in Mindanao, and Surigao. The capture and execution of Agustin Sumoroy on June 1650 led to the eventual defeat of the rebels. David Dula, Sumoroy's co-conspirator, continued the quest. Francisco Maniago's revolt in 1660 to 1661. In 1660, Francisco Maniago, a Kapampangan, led an uprising in Pampanga. The Kapampangans were against the tribute, forced labor, and rice exploitation. Andres Malong revolt in 1660 to 1661. Malong, who was the Maestro de Campo of Binalatongan, now San Carlos City, Pangasinan in the 1660s, was coaxed by Maniago to revolt against the abuses of the Spaniards because they were experiencing the same abuses. He proclaimed himself as King of Pangasinan.
The tax reform of 1884. One of the good reforms which Spain introduced in the 19th century was the tax reform of 1884. As provided by the Royal Decree of March 6, 1884, this tax reform contained two important provisions. First is the abolition of the hated tribute and its replacement of cedula tax, and reduction of the 40-day annual forced labor or pollo to 15 days. The cedulas personales were first issued based on the Royal Decree on March 6, 1884. All men and women residents of the islands, Spaniards, foreigners, and natives who were over 18 years old were required to obtain a cedula. The only exceptions were the Chinese, who paid another poll tax, the remontados de infieles that were not subject to the local administration, and the natives of colonies of archipelago of Jolo and of islands of Balabac and Palawan. All in all, there were 16 different classes of cedulas. Originally, there were 9 classes tax. The rate of taxes ranged from 1.50 pesos to 25 pesos, and a tenth gratis for priests, soldiers, and privileged classes. And that will be all for the reporting about the socio-economic status of the Philippines, including taxation during the Spanish period.